Biden-Harris ticket is the newest addition to the emerging narrative around the United States presidential election this November. That announcement by Biden himself, a former vice president, is already proving to be very popular with a growing number of Americans. It has also garnered considerable acceptance in many parts of the world, where as recently as 2 months ago, people rose in unison to condemn the extrajudicial murder of African-American George Floyd. Issues around the Black Lives Matter movement, which resulted from that unfortunate incident, have been getting renewed attention since the emergence of the Biden-Harris joint ticket. Analysts say the fact that Senator Harris is the first woman of color to be on a presidential election ticket, there will be greater focus on that and race relations in general with the lead-up to the election. To get a wider perspective on this and a number of other issues of international significance, we are now being joined by Professor Bolaji Akinyemi. Professor Bolaji Akinyemi is a professor of political science, a former Minister of External Affairs of Nigeria, and former Director General of the Nigerian Institute of International Affairs. Good morning, Prof, and thank you for joining us again on the morning show. Hello, Prof.
Good morning, Dr. Abati.
Good morning, sir.
Yes, I can hear you.
Very well. Well, very quickly, before we begin to talk about the U.S. Presidential election process and other issues of both international and local interest, first, I would like to take your comments on the death of someone who you knew very well and somebody with whom you interacted. At the time, he was the U.S. ambassador to Nigeria. And I'm talking about Ambassador Walter Omowale Carrington, whose death has been reported at the age of 90. What kind of man was he? And what's the significance of the role that he played when he was on duty here as the U.S. ambassador to Nigeria that led to Nigeria naming a major street in Lagos after him?
Well, Ambassador Walter Carrington was an ally, a supporter, a prime motivator of democracy in the world. By his death, the world, Africa, and Nigeria has lost a very significant player in the drive to enshring democracy. I first met Ambassador Carrington when I was a minister and I had cause to visit Washington. He wasn't an ambassador here at that time. Later, when he became an ambassador here, he came just on the eve of the June 12th crisis. And the democratic movement in Nigeria could not have had a better supporter than in Ambassador Carrington. After the crisis broke, he was constantly beside us. There are probably one or two aspects of that that even now I won't be able to talk about, maybe at another time, because he even tried in the middle of the crisis to ward off Abacha's coup d'etat. I knew that from first-hand dealings with him. And during the crisis, after he stopped being an ambassador here, he was with NADECO all throughout our activities. And anytime we were having something to do in New York or Washington, every morning, Ambassador Carrington and I will have breakfast, just the two of us, and he will brief me on the monitoring activities of the CIA and the State Department, always warning us to be careful in our dealings with the State Department. he was a great supporter of democracy in Nigeria. Like most of us, he was very disappointed at the outcome of the democratic struggle in Nigeria. Yes, you've mentioned that a street has been named after him. I think we should have done more, because there are Americans who then came in and benefited a lot at the return of civilian rule in Nigeria. And Ambassador Carrington did not look for and was not given the kind of recognition that I thought he would be given. We have lost a friend, but he did live a good and fulfilled life. We will miss him. That's very true.
Well, thank you, sir, for that very rich tribute on Ambassador Carrington. Well, we've lost a friend. We've also lost an in-law, and our condolences to his wife, Arese Carrington.
Yes. Let's move to America now and talk about the Biden-Harris ticket. Professor, what does that mean for America at a time like this? A year of reckoning, a lot will say, where there are increasing calls for racial justice, police reforms. What exactly does that ticket mean for America? Let's begin there.
Okay, if you want me to begin there. Kamala Harris, because of her background as first the district attorney in California, the attorney general, and a senator, and a member of the Committee on Judiciary in the Senate, has been involved in issues that are central to police activities, especially their role in, let's just say, non-white communities. And to that extent, her presence on the Democratic platform is bound to be seen as a signal that the issue of police reform or what have you is not going to take a back burner if that ticket wins the election in November. I am, should I say more, let me take an issue that is related to your question, but then that I will say it is more. I'm trying to expand my answer to the centrality of the significance of her being on the ticket. They don't even know what to call her. And I noticed that in Dr. Abati's introduction, he referred to her as a woman of color. She has called herself a black woman. Several of the tapes that I have gone through while preparing for my appearance here, just to make sure, she's referred to herself as a black woman. Now, that's very significant because it is a signal to the black community that I am one of you. I have always been one of you. She could have picked up on that term, a woman of color. It is something that is going to be central to our own identity. And I think I've had cause to discuss this with Dr. Abati. What will we call ourselves? Black, colored, African, or what? In her own case, while the American media has started using that term woman of color, she simply said, I am black. She might have added, and I am beautiful, because she is beautiful. The significance of her identity is crucial. Her mother, and I'm going to be very diplomatic in what I'm going to say. Her mother, though Indian, is not from the Indian establishment, or should we say, is not from the ruling class in India. She's from a level that is discriminated against in India, which means that her presence on the ticket actually is going to lift the status and the identity and the confidence of a rejected class in India. Her father was a West Indian. If after they got married, they had gone back to India, it's most likely that they would have been ostracized in Indian society. And yet, the stone rejected is most likely now to become the cornerstone. The significance of this is very crucial. It's monumental. President Obama is a Luo from Kenya, a group that has never been allowed to become president of Kenya, and yet became the most powerful man in the world as president of the United States. I predict that when a Nigerian American becomes either the governor or vice president or president of the United States, it's likely to come from a Nigerian group that hasn't tasted the corridors of power in Nigeria. So to that extent, the United States, in a way, is performing its role as a beacon, an uplifter of marginalized groups in the world. This is the monumental significance of the nomination of Kamala Harris as the vice presidential nominee on the Democratic ticket.
Okay, sir, very, very great analysis there, Prof. I want to talk about identity because you brought out something very important. Woman of color, Kamala Harris calls herself black. The media calls her a woman of color. People in the black community still don't fully accept her as black. And I'm very excited that you made mention of, Barack Obama's case, because that's always the case. Because when they're going to look at Kamala, they'll say, yeah, her father is Jamaican, but her mother is Indian. Because she associates with the black community doesn't make her black enough. Not like the black community will accept an African American itself. Don't you see an inroads to some sort of identity crisis here?
You are quite right to draw the attention of our viewers to this, because as you rightly said, Obama also did have that problem. Oh, the father is an African, therefore really he's an African, and is not really an original African American. I think that Kamala is more likely to be more acceptable, that is, as a step much further than President Obama, because of, well, once you've had an Obama, it becomes easier to have a Kamala Harris. And she has this multiplicity of identities. She's a woman, so the gender issue comes into it. And to that extent, you know, the American black women don't really have that kind of identity crisis that the African American male have. And I believe that her acceptance, in fact, let me use a bigger word, and her embrace by the women in the United States, by the black women especially, is likely to mute the, if you like, warmness towards her by the African American men. But you are right. I think that we don't have enough time in this program to deal with the psychological effect on the American black men of slavery, of Jim Crow, of discrimination, which still is endemic in the United States even now. The American black women have actually been the mainstay of American black society. This does not by any means negate or diminish the importance of the contribution of Martin Luther King, John Lewis, you know, all the black men who have suffered considerably in fighting discrimination in the United States. But in terms of aiming for that top post of either vice president or president by, do we say, the indigenous black male, maybe we are still one generation away.
Well, Prof, there's no doubt that the Biden-Harris ticket is a very strong one. It even further projects the Democratic Party as a progressive party. But President Trump doesn't seem to think so. He thinks that that ticket does not pose any threat to him. But beyond what the polls tell us at this point, what are your projections? What do you think is likely to happen? What will be the big issues in favor either way?
Dr. Abati, you will recall that some time ago, you and I sat around the same table along with others, and this was the time when Obama was running for office. I believe there were only two of us around that table at that time who were prepared to put our money on Obama winning the election. And of course, he did. Am I prepared to stick out my neck again this time? I think I just will have to, given what will be the monumental significance of a Biden-Harris victory and what will be the disaster, not just for the United States, but for the rest of the world, of another 4 years of Trump. So I'm a betting man. I like to put a little money on lottery from time to time. So let me put my money, my pocket is empty now. Let me put my money on a Biden-Harris victory. But I don't think it's going to be a landslide. Believe me, it's going to be a touch and go because of the effect of COVID-19, because of the attempt by the Trump administration to probably manipulate the postal votes that are going to be cast. Trump is a is a gambler himself. And I think until the last throw of the dice, he's not going to give up. But nevertheless, I will still say Biden and Harris presidency in November. And it will be a major victory for the rest of the world. Why? Because, let us face it, the United States is still a global player. And what happens in the United States affects the rest of us, whether we are Americans or not. It will mean a return to globalism, a return to those international institutions that Trump had left, a return to what we normally associate with American values, even though I think that this is overstressed. But this is values of human rights, values of democracy. You know, America will return to being regarded by those who are oppressed in the world as a natural supporter. That is why one has to just stick out his neck and hope that the Biden-Harris team will win.
Well, we'll hold you to that, so keep this prediction. But, Prof, let me ask you, does Kamala Harris add any depth to the perceived foreign policy strength of Joe Biden? And what would you say is the perception in diplomatic circles towards this ticket?
No, her contribution to the ticket is not on the foreign policy section of the scale. Biden himself is going to be the foreign policy guru. If you go back way back as the 1960s, when Reagan was in power, no, that was 70s, when Reagan was in power, Biden had been on the foreign policy, Foreign Affairs Committee of the Senate. So he is in fact, that's one of the reasons why Obama picked him, to bring that foreign policy experience. So he will, Biden himself will be the foreign policy guru. However, you see, the fact that we are talking about Kamala Harris in the way we will not talk about Pence shows the attraction he holds out to the world. Some of it we have already spoken about. Look at her stretch. Southeast Asian woman, West Indian woman, African American woman, or a black woman. I mean, her stretch in her constituency spreads much, much wider than the shores of the United States. And there is no doubt in my mind that the diplomatic community is fascinated by her presence on that ticket in a way in which we were not fascinated by Hillary Clinton. Hillary Clinton, came across as this tough, no-nonsense woman with no soft side. Kamala Harris comes across as tough, focused, and yet with a soft side to her that people will find attractive. The way women and children related to her and she related to them during the Democratic primaries was fascinating to watch. So I think that do you know what she reminds me of actually? Jacqueline Kennedy. The way the world rose to embrace the Kennedy administration because of Jacqueline, who was just the first lady. But in this case, to me, in the past 48 hours, the reaction, the fascination that I have seen, as I said, reminds me of Jacqueline Kennedy, except this time, it's Jacqueline Kennedy with a substance, a solid political base that you could actually touch and feel.
Okay. Great one. And what you said is already happening. In fact, the Democratic Party, in the 4-hour span that the announcement was made that Kamala Harris will be on the ticket with Joe Biden, they raised about $4 to $10 million US. And that's to show the edge. And the soft side you spoke about, that was indicative when Kamala gave her speech yesterday. She said the first Biden I know was Beau Biden, and she spoke glowingly of Joe Biden's son that passed Beau Biden, and they were fellow attorneys. And you could see how that almost brought Joe to tears yesterday while she was speaking. But I quickly want to talk about something amidst all of this. A lot of people posit, correct me if I'm wrong, sir, that if a George Floyd incident didn't happen, then we will not have a Kamala on the ticket. Because the George Floyd incident brought about a lot of talk about criminal justice reforms and the likes, and Black Lives Matter protests. And she fits the bill, a black woman and also a woman big on criminal justice reform. Do you foresee any way she's going to, tip the balance as regards criminal justice in America based on her distance and experience?
Well, not only that, because the November election is also going to affect seats in the Senate and in the House of Rep. If the Democrats can snatch the Senate from the Republicans and hold their controlling majority in the House of Representatives, and then with a precedent, because don't let us ignore the fact that Joe Biden had a solid base in the black community. Look at the margin of his vote during the primaries. In fact, it was the black communities that swung the primary victory away from Sanders to Joe Biden. So to that extent, Kamala it's not just filling a vacuum. She's strengthening a base that was already there. You don't need to push Joe Biden towards black issues. Remember, he actually also went there and took a knee bend when these demonstrations were going on. And he was embraced by the black community. He visited the family of the bereaved. So there is no doubt that we will see action. We will see action towards police reform. We will see action towards social justice. And having a vice president who herself represents an embodiment of that will greatly strengthen the administration's push towards that side, more than it did when Obama was in power. Because Obama, being the first black president, needed to be reticent, needed to be careful. A lot of people don't know that Obama has a flaming temper when he got angry. But he needed to hide that so that he wasn't thought of as the angry black man as a president. With Biden-Harris administration, there will be no need for such reticence. You are going to see strong action.
Well, Prof, the last time we hosted you on this program, one of the things we discussed then was COVID-19 and the global effort to find a solution to the many challenges of that scourge. Now, this week, something interesting happened. The Russians announced that they had found the first vaccine, that they found the cure. But other international players are really skeptical. The Germans have expressed their skepticism. Others have followed suit. Even the WHO has raised questions. But I expressed the view the other day that is what we're dealing with, a case of vaccine nationalism in this rush for a solution to COVID-19. And then is it standard practice for the Russians to be hiding intelligence, because they've been accused of hiding intelligence, hiding research information, and refusing to submit what they call Sputnik 5 to peer review.
Well, you are quite right, Dr. Abati. I would prefer to say that the Russians have a vaccine candidate, not a vaccine candidate, because they haven't gone through that stage 3, where you expose maybe 30,000, 50,000 to the vaccine that you are trying to show work. Until they've got, so what they have done is to announce that they have a vaccine before that stage 3. And there are very many vaccine candidates who are right now at that pre-stage 3 status. You have the one at Oxford, you have several in the United States, you have one by the Chinese. So really, it's just a play on words. The Russians cannot claim that they have a vaccine yet. However, having said that, let me say that our doctors who have studied in the Soviet Union or in Russia actually have told me that there are several drugs that they use in Russian medicine and that work, but because the Russians really don't trust the WHO and believe that they are going to be rejected by Western doctors and Western scientists in any case, have never really bothered to supply these drugs onto the Western medical system, but that they use them in internal medicine in Russia, and that the medicine works. So in a way, Russia is not really bothered by whether you accept it or not. I mean, Russia is still a huge continent, and they probably feel that their domestic market, which still stretches to cover even the former members of the Soviet Union, will be sufficient to underwrite this vaccine if the vaccine works. I think what is likely to happen, since they never tell you, and the same thing goes for the Chinese, you really won't know how many of the quote-unquote victims of the experiment turn out. I mean, what will be the magnitude while they fine-tune the vaccine? But there's no doubt in my mind that this Sputnik 5, as they call it, will be one of the vaccines that will be in use, even though it may just be in use within Russia. But it wouldn't matter really to the Russians.
Well, this looks like another race to space. When you look at the strained relationship between Russia and the West, which has been historical, would you separate this race for a vaccine from the geopolitical clout that is happening at the moment?
No, I won't. And go back to even before the Russian Revolution, you would discover that there has been, from the time of Peter the Great, there has been this sense of competition with the West. Behind it is basically the Russian desire to be accepted as an equal with the West. If you scratch behind the competition, you will find what I really think is a lack of self-confidence on the part of the Russian, driven by a desire to be accepted as an equal by Western civilization. That was actually what was behind a lot of the reforms of Peter the Great, that then metamorphosed into the Russian Revolution, and that has been there. One of the basis of attraction and support of Putin in Russia is that longing to get back that status as Soviet Union. There's a lot of regret among the Russians at the breakup of the Soviet Union, which they feel was engineered by the West because the West wanted to reduce their status. So to that extent, in a situation like this, and in several other cases, I think somebody called, no, I think it was Dr. Abati who called it vaccine nationalism or some sort of term, and that adequately describes what's going on with that vaccine. And also, even on the side of the West, don't let us forget that there is a high dose of vaccine nationalism also on the part of the United States. All you need to do is to listen to the language of Trump. They need to make America great, whether it's economically or medically. And the rush, and there are Western medical scientists who are also cautioning the United States that it is using politics to drive this development of vaccines, and that perhaps the only one really that you can depend upon is the one coming from Oxford University, which seems to be following laid down protocols in vaccine development. So there is nationalism all over, but added to it is the desire to be regarded as an equal with the West by Russia.
Okay, so that's one thing. I quickly want to talk about Beirut. Lebanon has been in a terrible situation for some time now, but the explosion only exacerbated. In fact, protests started last year when the Lebanese lira went down in value, and this was exacerbated when the government was trying to clamp down and was trying to stop young people from using WhatsApp. Now, the government is no more as a result of this protest. There are still protests on the streets of Beirut. There's a political dimension to it, the power sharing between the Maronite Christians and the Sunnis. A lot of people say it's not working, it's all corruption in the end. And just paint a picture of what is happening in Beirut now, sir, for us.
Lebanon is unfortunately a failed state. Not all the fault is due to the Lebanese. I think Lebanon has become a playing ground for all sorts of regional powers. Iran, Turkey, Syria, and Israel. And behind this, you have the United States and you have France. Now, this is a recipe for disaster. I mean, yes, when you are making stew, there are several things you can put in so that the stew turns out palatable. But then there are other things you cannot put in if it's stew you are trying to make. Or else, you're just going to get a big mess on the plate. In the case of Lebanon, too many cooks spoil the broth. That's the applicable proverb to what is happening there. On top of that is what they call corruption. I said what they call corruption because really it's an interplay of political rivalry by regional powers who are then using their domestic allies. I visited Lebanon several times because the United Nations has a peacekeeping operation there. And Nigeria used to be, I don't know whether we still are, used to have troops under UN command in Lebanon. And I must have visited them about 5 or 6 times. The Lebanese are a lovely people. They had a lovely country. And I suppose to that extent, we shouldn't have been surprised. After all, honey attracts not only bees, honey also attracts flies. And I think that's what has happened in the case of Lebanon. And unfortunately, you didn't have a Lebanese nationalism sufficiently strong enough to fight off these external forces. There are states within states in Lebanon, and that is why it cannot function. The same people who are the problem are now being told or are telling the Lebanese that they will be part of the solution. Now, that's unworkable, and I think it's unfortunate. There is a lesson for developing countries. I will not like to give specific illustrations in Nigeria so that one cannot be accused of drawing the attention of disparate elements or factors in Nigeria. But there are infrastructural institutions in Nigeria that if you are not careful, what happened at that dock could happen. Do you know what is in a lot of the containers that have been abandoned at our ports? Do you know how many of the, just look at what is happening between the Kaduna and Abuja Expressway. How open that has been to the activities of...
Well, definitely there are lessons.
You know what I mean.
Yes, certainly there are lessons.
So there are lessons for us to learn from Lebanon to make sure that we also keep track of what is happening in our country, to ensure that we don't become a playground to other people.
On that note, thank you very much, Professor Bolaji Akinyemi, for your insights and for creating time to be with us on the morning show today. Thank you very much, sir.